Let's move to our final session of the day, and to introduce session number 4, let's welcome Coolidge Senator Emily Garabrandt.
Hello, my name is Emily Garabrandt. I am a Coolidge Senator from the class of 2024. I am a freshman at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We will now move on to session 4. The title of the session is The Next Rescue, 2 Big Ideas. The introducer and discussant for this session is Mr. Chuck DeFeo. Mr. DeFeo serves as Chief Executive Officer of National Review and the National Review Institute, whom we are proud to have as our media partner for the event. Prior to joining National Review, Mr. DeFeo led strategy at I360, where he helped develop grassroots and advocacy tools now used by more than 10,000 organizations. Please join me in welcoming Mr. DeFeo to the stage.
Well, to close out such amazing programming, it's an honor for me to be here with Mr. Steve Forbes, and somebody who truly needs no introduction. Mr. Forbes, it's an honor to be here with you. I'm not going to get into a long introduction, but obviously he's chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. But if I could give a little bit of a personal anecdote, I was in college when I first came to Washington, D.C. in 1996. And you look back at his presidential campaigns, the depth of his vision, the strength of his advocacy for the flat tax, and several other things that he advocated for, has shaped tax policy and how Republicans have spoken about the tax code for the last 30 years. And the tax reform of the Bush administration, the tax reform of Trump 1.0, and what's been extended in Trump 2.0, has all points back to the vision that he had. And the nation owes him a debt of gratitude for the work that he has done. He chose to step out and lead, and he has had lasting impact that we're all indebted to. So again, it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Chuck. Thank you, Emily, for kicking off this session. Thank all of you for staying to the end. Although Amity probably knows each and every one of you, so it's good you're all still here. And so you can come back next year. It's great to be with young people. They always say, especially at graduation ceremonies, you have to undo the mess left by previous generations. And my father, when he would give a commencement speech, would say, now keep in mind, they said the same thing to your parents. Also too, many of you will become parents. And again, my father liked to say, a good sign that you are an effective parent is when you become an embarrassment to your children. So just keep that in mind. But the program is supposed to be about 2 big ideas on getting the American economy today and the future back on the kind of track it was during Coolidge's years as president in the 1920s, and reference to the extraordinary growth we experienced in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The 2 big ideas are ones that seem unimaginable today, but they will come to pass. One is the gold standard, and the other is flat tax, as was made mention of. Flat tax is a single rate system. You have generous exemptions for adults and for children. Single rate, you could do it literally on a few keystrokes, and that's that. One number, a family of 4, would pay no federal income tax on the first $55,000 of income, only 17 or 15 cents on the dollar above that, no tax on savings, no death tax. You should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS. And that way, and you do the same thing on the business side, and great things would happen. Now, when you mention the word gold standard or the word gold, economists here accepted, but you're among most economists, you should have smelling salts, because they will fade away at the idea of eating anything mentioning the gold standard, sort of like waving the cross or garlic before vampires. They just fade away. But in terms of both are regarded today as impossible, but because of circumstances, because of crisis, they will come to pass, and we'll truly get the real revival of America, the kind of way we did years ago. Now, obviously, there are many other things that have to be done, clearly, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't get the money right, If you don't get the taxes right, everything else is going to come to naught in terms of their full effectiveness. The magic formula of low tax rates and sound money was the title of a book of a co-author of our book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and How to Fix It, a fellow named Nathan Lewis. But so let's start with the gold standard. There are various ways to do it, but essentially the value of the dollar is fixed to gold. That does not mean you need gold to back every dollar. All it means is once upon a time, we had the gold standard for 180 years. The gold was fixed until the 1970s at $35 an ounce. All that meant was that if gold would start to go above $35 an ounce, you had to take measures like reducing the money supply or something else to get it back to 35. If it went below 35, you knew you had to take opposite measures, but the key thing was to keep it at 35. Gold in that sense is like a yardstick, a measuring stick. But unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that it's been accused of everything under the sun, from causing depressions, acne, hair loss. If you miss a train, you can blame it on the gold standard, but it worked. Today, if you went back on it, you'd probably have to have a rate of $4,500 or something like that. That shows how much money has been devalued since the 1970s, and it's had a very deleterious impact on the economy. So that gets to the very basic question: why do you need stable money? Why should it have a fixed measure of value? Well, money is a measuring rod, a measuring tool. It measures value. Keep that in mind. It measures value. The way a scale measures weight, a clock measures time, a ruler measures length. We all know in the marketplace, fixed weights and measures make things work. When you buy a pound of cheese, it's 16 ounces. It doesn't float 13 ounces one day, 18 ounces the next. You buy a gallon of gasoline, fixed amount, doesn't change, makes markets much more efficient. Now imagine for the moment the Federal Reserve was put in charge of the Time Bureau and decided to float the clock. So you have 60 minutes an hour in one day, 48 the next, 72 the day after. You know instinctively that would make life much more difficult. That's what happens when you have unreliable standards of measure of value. Imagine baking a cake if we had a floating clock. It says bake the batter 30 minutes. You have to wonder, is that nominal minutes, inflation-adjusted minutes, New York minutes, Mexican minutes? Just makes life much more difficult. So in a sense, the unfixing of the value of the dollar has led to a much slower economic growth rates. And when you have a fixed measure of value, it just makes life much easier to focus on productive things. But however, the idea of fooling around with measures of value or anything else, imagine, for example, we have an obesity crisis in this country. Well, the way the Federal Reserve would solve it would be to decree that a pound would have 32 ounces instead of 16. Suddenly, your nominal weight would fall in half. Voila! You don't even have to take shots anymore. It's miraculous. But the unstable money, which we haven't had since the 1970s, means a lot of activity goes to hedging, a lot of activity goes to speculation, led to the rise of Bitcoin and other like stable coins and other things. Bitcoin was a high-tech cry for help from the depredations of government. And so instead of with inflation, when currencies go down in value, you get a lot of unproductive investment, a lot of activity hedging against inflation. Whenever anyone asks is gold an investment? No, gold is not an investment. It is an insurance policy, a hedge against the depredations of government. Now, since the 1970s, when we went off the gold standard, the U.S. average growth rate has fallen from about, pick a date, starting date, ending date, from about 3.5% a year to about 2.5%, 2 3/4, maybe even less. Doesn't sound like much, but you compound that over 50 years since the early 1970s and compare the average growth rate of America for its first 180 years of existence when we had a gold standard, which saw a civil war, depressions, world wars, all sorts of political convulsions. Nonetheless, the average growth rate since the 1970s has been far less. If we'd maintained that 180-year average of growth, household incomes today, which is about $80,000, give or take, would be $50,000 higher. Wouldn't people be happier with $50,000 higher of income? That's what happens when you have unstable money. It accumulates over time, and the results are devastating. But it's not just economic. It undermines traditional values. It prizes speculation more than productive things. In the currency markets today, the average volume of trading in currencies is now about $7 to $8 trillion a day. People trying to make money on infinitesimal changes in the value of currencies against each other. A lot of brain power involved in that, but that's what happens when you have that kind of instability. You look at Latin America's average growth rates versus North America. Alexander Hamilton put us on the gold standard, and you can see the results in a very vivid way. So you have windfall gains, windfall losses. Let's say you contract to buy 4 dozen eggs. The value of the currency changes and you only get 3. So life takes on an arbitrary value. It undermines trust. It also leads to scapegoating. Politicians will never own up to what they do to the value of money when you don't have a fixed standard. In Roman times, they blamed Christians for inflation. The lions didn't mind, but it did nothing to cure the inflation or the depredations of Roman emperors. In medieval times, witches were blamed. In the early 20s, with the Weimar terrible German hyperinflation, Jewish merchants and bankers were blamed. In the 1970s, Arab oil producers were blamed. So today, it's people who buy houses for investment and things like that, always pointing to a scapegoat, which poisons the political atmosphere. And it really leads to demagoguery, also leads to crime. In a book called The Death of Money, written by an Englishman called Adam Ferguson, about the hyperinflation of Germany in the early 1920s, which created conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party later on. He pointed out that before the hyperinflation, Germany was the most law-abiding nation on earth. With the hyperinflation, crime became rampant. People only could protect themselves by doing things, by breaking the rules, breaking the laws, and that kind of civil society gets severely damaged. Today, we don't have hyperinflation or anything near it, but since the 1970s, you might say we have a slow motion results that you get from a hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, you see it immediately. But with the slow motion kind, you still get the results, but it's spread over a period of time. Today, it can be wrapped up in the affordability crisis. Why is housing unaffordable? Why are other things seemingly more expensive over time? People don't understand the process, so you get that phenomenon of scapegoating. So in terms of why gold, well, for a variety of reasons, it keeps its value, intrinsic value, better than anything else on earth, better than copper, silver, anything else. Has done so for 3,000 years. And so, again, it's a way of measuring value. It doesn't restrict the money supply. That's one of the myths about gold, in addition to acne. Between 1775 and 1900, when we went from a small agricultural nation to the mightiest industrial nation of the world, the U.S. money supply grew 160-fold, even though the supply of gold only grew 3-fold. Gold is like a ruler, and the number of rulers doesn't restrict the size of a building you wish to construct, but it just simply makes sure you have a fixed measure, a way of measuring things. So for a variety of reasons, it keeps its value better than anybody else. And what diplomats and military strategists and government leaders, historians don't recognize when they look at a currency is the gold standard or stable money is a source of strength, a source of power when you have a reliable currency. They miss it completely. How did Holland, the Netherlands, small, under the thumb of Spain, 1500s, fix their currency, fixed value? Holland not only gained its independence, created a worldwide commercial empire, and became the financial center of the world. England took after what the Dutch did. England, 1690s, before William III came in, overthrowing James II. William from Holland, that Dutch attitude. What you saw there in starting the 1690s and then the early 1700s, England went from a third-rate power to eventually the greatest empire in the world history and the financial center of the world, even after losing the North American colonies, a process we start to celebrate this year, especially on the 4th of July. But again, small nation, and we were once a small nation. But having Alexander Hamilton during those dreary winters fighting the Revolutionary War at night by candlestick was writing down essays on how to create a financial system that would imitate that of England so that we wouldn't fall on the path of so many nations and would set the basis for the U.S. becoming a great economic power. And as I say, it worked. So it's a source of strength. So you can start out small, but you can become strong if you have that trust and reliability. So the next time you hear about affordability and things like that, just keep in mind when you undermine your money, bad things happen. Whether it's fast like a hyperinflation or slow motion such we've had since the 1970s, the results are still deleterious. As John Maynard Keynes, he just said some things right. He said when the money goes down in value, not one person in a million understands what's happening and undermines all the kinds of things that make for sound economic growth. Now, so gold standard. Coolidge understood it. That's enough of an authority. Now, taxes. The thing to keep in mind is, which too many people in this town and elsewhere don't understand, is that it's a price and a burden. The tax you pay on incomes, the price you pay for working. Tax on capital gains, the price you pay for taking a risk that works out. Tax on profit, the price you pay for being successful. So when you lower the price of good things like productive work, risk-taking success, you get less of it. Raise the price, you get, when you lower the price, you get more of it. When you raise the price, you get less of it. So lowering rates makes possible commerce because you can focus on doing good things instead of coping with a crazy tax code. Now, the current federal income tax system, it's no news, is an incomprehensible stew of corruption. It's over 10 million words, depending on who's doing the counting. It's not just the code itself, but all the attendant rules and regulations. Now, several years ago, a magazine did a survey. They took a hypothetical family's finances, gave the numbers to 46 different tax preparers, people considered the best in the field, and you know what they got back? 46 different estimates of what the family owed, thousands of dollars of difference. This from people who make their money making the living doing this thing. So, as I used to say, I'd like to bury the tax code, but the EPA would not allow that, so we have to find other too toxic. But it is a dead weight on the economy, corrupts our politics, brings out in the worst of us. It's moral, like in terms of trust that you get from sound money, that's trust, helps create conditions of social trust in the future. But in terms of taxes, it's also a moral issue. If you take the IRS and others estimate that we spend 6 to 8 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. It also costs, both in cash and in time, over $500 billion a year to try to comply with this monstrous code. So go back 20 years and consider the trillions of dollars, the hundreds of billions of hours that were wasted on this monster. Imagine if those resources had gone for new products, new services, new medicines, new medical devices, how much better off we'd be. Talk about opportunity cost, all this immense talent on something so idiotic. So the solution is simple. Throw out the tax code, however you want to dispose of it. I'm sure there are clean ways to do it now. And bring in a single rate system. As I mentioned, you have generous exemptions for adults and for children. So in that, when you do the same thing on business, you could be able to deduct from your revenue the cost of doing business, labor costs, minerals, and whatever, and also instant depreciation, instant expensing of investments. And that way you get really compliance, better compliance, and a better focus on doing productive things instead of the things we have to do today, and numerous different kind of tax credits, everyone trying to jigger the code, and it also corrupts the whole atmosphere. So gold, flat tax, it's good for our foreign security, and the nice thing is, if we do things right here on the money and taxes, the rest of the world will follow. Just remember in the 1980s, in closing, when Ronald Reagan enacted his great tax cuts, when in a few years, 50 other countries reduced their tax rates and helped set the boom that lasted until recent times, until the crisis of 2008, 2009, when we started to devalue the dollar. So, I'll say this, warning to the White House, President George W. Bush and his team thought if you gradually weaken the dollar, that would improve the trade balance and all good things would happen. When you undermine the integrity of your currency, you're not a great country, and you create economic problems like we got with the crisis of 2008, 2009. So if you want a great country, you have to have a great currency, and the way you do that is with the gold standard and the flat tax. Thank you.
So I think someone's walking around the room collecting questions. If you have questions for Mr. Forbes, please give them to whoever is walking around. I'll be asking some questions as we gather those. A lot of the conversation today has been historical, but there's some significant challenges, as is often said in this town right now. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And a lot of what we'll talk about in these questions is what's going on today and then project how does that lead to an America in the future based on the decisions that we'll have. One of those moments is that we are in a populist moment. And populists have distrust of elites and institutions, yet we're also seeing demand from that same those populist wings of more government intervention in the economy and in society and in shaping culture. How would you say to those in the populist wing what's the reality of when government takes greater control and expands its power? What does that do to economic freedom and prosperity?
Well, first of all, the reason why you have these, what you might call untraditional parties rising up, forces in this country and in Europe, is because the established parties failed to deliver the goods. They failed to understand what makes economies move ahead. We all know in Europe, massive amounts of regulation, massive taxation. By the way, when you look at Europe and other countries' tax systems, just don't look at their income tax rate or their corporate rate or the VAT rate, which is a hidden sales tax. Look at their payroll taxes. In this country, the FICA taxes, we call them FICA taxes for Social Security and Medicare, is 15.3%. Half paid by you, the worker, half paid by the employer. In most countries, it's 30 to 40%. Japan is 32% combined, and that's no limit. In this country, if you make less than peaks out at 180,000, Japan no peak at all. So you start off paying 32% out, directly or indirectly. France, it gets over sometimes 50%, and you wonder why they've had no growth for 20 years. So look at the payroll taxes as well. So that's why you get these parties. They didn't control immigration. President Trump did it from day one, enforced the law. Hello. Amazing things happen when you do that. The Europeans didn't do it, and so that led to a bitter reaction. But also, too, when people don't see things going well, they want solutions. And unfortunately, often the solutions are treating the equivalent of shooting the messenger. That's how you get scapegoating, is you don't blame the political system for making these huge mistakes on money and taxes. You blame those who deliver the bad news, like the grocery store or the housing authority or whatever. And so it's like shooting the messenger. So Europe did not deliver, and they went on this, I'll offend people, but so what? It's the end of the day. But the fact of the matter is, this whole thing on alternative fuels, so-called renewables, has been one of the greatest wastes of human resources in human history. It's not that we don't have problems with the environment. There's specific ways you deal with the environment. For example, if the Dutch did nothing, since they're underwater, if they did nothing, it would be an aquarium today. But they have dike systems and the like, so they cope with the problem of being below sea level. But the fact of the matter is, so we wasted literally trillions of dollars, and all we got for it was this huge lobby that wants more of the same. No growth. Germany's deindustrializing. British costs are 2 to 3 times for energy as they are in this country, and people react. And so they go for crazy, seemingly crazy things because the parties that should have known better did not deliver the goods. So looking forward, we must do things right in this country. I think we have the capacity to do it, and if we do, by golly, not only will we benefit, but remember, other countries will follow suit. They'll wonder, okay, it's working for them. They may not give you credit, but so what? they will start to do things right. Success begets success. And again, that's how you get real power in the world, just as the Dutch did, or the northern Italian states in the 11 or 1200s when they suddenly became financial centers. By the way, it was those northern Italian states like Florence that reorganized the whole textile industry in Flanders and England. And that's how you got the growth of the clothing industry, was the banking of banks in northern Italy. So, again, that's the real source of power. Military power comes ultimately from, as we heard from earlier, from Dr. Herman and others, from having a strong, vibrant economy where people from the most unlikely sources can come forward and do amazing things. Henry Kaiser, they mentioned the Liberty ships, was a construction guy, built dams, built roads, knew next to nothing on shipping, but he came up with new ways to build freighters quickly. Instead of months or years, they could do it in a matter of weeks. 3,000 were produced during the war, not needed after the war, but that kind of ability to respond to a crisis is what makes this country unique. We have a task, we'll find a way to do it. And by the way, it gets to the point made by earlier panelists about meeting problems, but it also meets the needs and wants of other people. As Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, co-founder, once put it when he was asked, "Do you do marketing surveys?" He said, "No, because people don't know what they want until I show them." But he was making an important point. You put a new product out there, you hope it'll work, but you don't know how it's going to do. But then suddenly you find these handhelds. We used to call them cell phones. And the first one, 40 years ago, before most of you were born, the first one cost $3,995, weighed like a brick, size of a shoebox, and had 1 hour battery life, and could just do voice. Today, it's a virtual supercomputer. And if you'd said 30 years ago, Chuck, that your grandmother could operate a supercomputer, which would have been the size of this room here, you'd have gotten a very strange look. But now we take it for granted. So if we place a call to a goat herder in Mongolia, and it takes more than 6 seconds, we say, what a piece of crap. Why is it taking so long? It's amazing.
Well, then that's a good segue to the next question then. Some have argued that as data starts to show, we have somewhat of a bifurcated economy here in the United States today. And some would argue that it's markets that have failed and have been the underlying cause. I would argue it's monetary policy, it's been tax policy. What would you say to someone that says we need much more government intervention in the economy because markets have failed?
It's like saying if you have pneumonia, let's go out and strip and sit in the snow. It's the way doctors used to treat patients 300 years ago. They'd bleed you. That, of course, got rid of the pain and suffering because it got rid of the patient. And so more government, that's the cause. It's like denying germ theory. Oh, let's have an operation but not wash our hands. Let's put them in mud first and see what happens. So we have to be more assertive and learn communications in a way to get the point across that what the true cause is, and you are the solution. When these barriers are removed, when you have an environment where people can come and do great things, guess what happens? People, again, come from the most unlikely sources, unlikely areas, and do things that were previously unimaginable, and to somebody, if you brought them back from the dead, would think it was magic, but then we take the magic for granted. Imagine going through a lot of these doors, it opens automatically. That would have really spooked out people a couple of seconds. Whoa, what is going on here? Who's behind that? And so, again, it's the failure of government creating the right environment. This gets a quick thing on healthcare. We don't have real free markets in healthcare. We have pieces of it. It's mostly third party, whether it's employers, insurance companies, government, Medicare, Medicaid primarily. That is the essence of the industry, and what we have to keep pushing for, by such as taking all these crazy restrictions off of health savings accounts, is where you control the money, not the employer, not some third party. You control the money, and amazing things will happen, positive things. But we don't have it today, and the proof of it is the lousiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest, curtain in between, and the other guest is sick, as they routinely do in hospitals. I mean, it's sort of crazy. You go to the hospital, oh, I can get a private room. Wow, this is great. 200 years ago at inns, they'd put you all in one room and one bed, which was great, not great for sanitation. And so they came up it wasn't really until the 1800s of having separate rooms at an inn or hotel. But hospitals, because it's third party, you still have some today where they put you in a room with another patient. Crazy.
Speaking of things that would shock people today is the size of our national debt and the continued growth of it. And it is obviously social programs and Social Security and other things that are driving our national debt. And it's really entitlement reform that would solve the problem. But that's not something those in Washington really want to touch. If it's not entitlement reform, what could politicians do to actually lower debt growth?
Well, the first thing, especially Republicans, have to learn to do is not sound like you're taking something away from people. And the Democrats have been masters, the far left have been masters when you ever talk about changing health care policies. You're going to take grandma, it's almost like they invented wheelchairs to make it easy to get grandma off the cliff and taking things away from people. And so the way you solve the entitlements on health care is to push for a true free market, which is just beginning. And one of the things that's happened in recent years because of rising costs is that most employers now don't do dollar-for-dollar coverage. They have a high deductible, and that's leading finally to real pressure for price transparency. But too many times if you go to the doc or the hospital or clinic and you ask in advance what it costs, again, you're going to get a very strange look like, what's it to you? And so you don't get the kind of free market. So you have the agency running Medicare and Medicaid putting out 11,000 pages of regulations each year trying to replicate what a free market would do naturally in terms of what you do in different situations. So the way you solve Medicare and Medicaid is by the free market. And then the way you'd see it happen in Medicare is you'd have, let's call it Part G. They have Part A, Part B, but to call it Part G, take a Trumpism, G for great. Part G would be, and there may be a Part G, I don't know, but Part G, this Part G would be, you'd get 15 or 20,000 a year as a couple in your health savings account. You'd be covered for catastrophic coverages above a certain level, but you would control the money. And one of the things that happens with Medicare is the number of tests you end up getting because somebody else is paying for it. Whereas if it comes out of your pocket, you say, do I really need that test? You start getting a real market work, asking questions. And that's the way you start it with healthcare and with transparency, as people are now paying more out of pocket than ever before. You'd start to get a real consumer market. As for Social Security, as for Medicaid, do what they do in Singapore. Singapore has a system that covers everybody. They deduct a big chunk of your paycheck, but you own the money. In effect, your health savings account. They have a different name for it. But you determine what plan you have. You determine what hospital you go to. And as a result, costs in Singapore, and they're very highly educated, the docs, best schools in the world, procedures are 1/3 the cost of they are in the United States, and their longevity is higher than that of the United States. So you can do that with Medicaid on the state level, have your own accounts, put the money in, you're in charge of it. And in terms of Medicare, again, have that Part G, and Social Security. Don't take anything away now. Stop talking about raising the retirement age. That can happen when people feel good about the economy. You can make that change. But first, start the debate going, and there's tons of research on this, for young people, where a portion of their FICA tax goes not to this town, but to your own personal account. You own it. And the nice thing about that is, as a young person, first part-time job, you start to accumulate this thing called capital. You want to learn about it, and you know instinctively it's your labor that is providing that, not a politician. It's your labor that's doing that. And you're not going to have much tolerance for people who are going to mess around with what your work has produced. That way, you pick your own retirement age. You want to do it at 60, fine. You want to you're optimistic, you want to wait till you're 90, fine. If If you have money in your account when you go because you haven't annuitized it all, you can give it to your kids, grandkids, your favorite cat or dog or whatever. But again, it turns what is a destroyer of capital into a creator of capital. So there are positive ways. There's what you might call root canal without anesthesia, which would be raising the retirement age on Social Security to 85. Medicare, if you live above 90, you get shot. I mean, there are ways there are ways to deal with it. But those are the negative ways. Do it the positive way. Put you, the patient, in charge. We trust you. Do it this way. I shouldn't say it in this time. We trust you more than the Washington politicians. They'll buy into that.
So shifting to the workforce, artificial intelligence is expected to reshape how we do work in this country and change productivity significantly. What policy changes, if any, or can we put are necessary from the government or in how education is shaped, or should we just let the markets decide?
Whenever you have something new, it always brings new body of law, like the rise of the automobile, whole new, enforcement, insurance, everything else. So when you get something like AI, you have to see actually how it unfolds before putting on regulations or rules when you don't really know what you're talking about. I think it's going to be, and anything can be used for good purposes and bad purposes, and AI is one of those things. By the way, a friend of mine once pointed out, calling it artificial intelligence, the person who invented those words should be spanked. We don't call airplanes artificial birds, you see, you'd point out. We don't call automobiles, artificial horses. But it can be a great aid. And one of the things that you can look forward to is not only great driverless cars, so as you get older, and some of us fall into, you don't have to worry about the keys going, because somebody's going to do it for you, and probably better than you. And in terms of robotics, as I heard the other day, there's work on where if you're in the hospital bed, there are now robots, almost like jelly feeling, that can take you out of a bed without nurses or aides going through that very difficult and dangerous process. So in AI too, it should be able to advance the development of new drugs, which now takes 10 to 12 years. It should maybe 10 or 12 months. At my age, I want it in 10 days or 12 days. I don't want to wait 10 years, but can advance the development of new drugs. So there's a lot of good with it. And by the way, there are always fears when something new comes along. There's mention earlier of the great rise of electricity. When electricity first came to the fore over 200 years ago, there was the theory or fear that you could use electricity to bring the dead back to life. And you had medical students raiding graveyards, not for dissection, but also they'd put wires on these cadavers and do the jolt and see it come bouncing around. Oh, maybe I can bring them back to life. And that was the source of the novel Frankenstein, using electricity to bring these things to life. It never happened, but it did make for great movies, great books, great plays. And so hopefully that'll be the denouement of artificial intelligence. But like anything, it can be used for good purposes or bad purposes. And James Madison, father of our Constitution, pointed out, since we're not angels, we do need laws. But we have to make sure they're sensible laws, and also customs where certain things you just don't do, whether they're written in law or not, you just don't do them. And we've sort of lost that.
So when you think about laws or regulations, there's no stronger advocate for a stable dollar and the gold standard, and we just heard it, than you. But we've got this moment where digital currencies are rising, and that's actually something that Washington, D.C. and this administration has really embraced evaluating. What would you recommend to regulators as they start to think about the role of digital currencies in our economy?
Well, if government's in the business, again, I shouldn't say it, of ballyhooing bitcoins and digital coins and the like, be cautious, be polite, be cautious. So in terms of digital currencies, it's going to come to pass where they will create digital money, digital devices, where you can use it for commerce with confidence, which would mean full transparency, where you can see what's actually behind the thing. And then you're going to see a real battle royale as the government's monopoly of currency gets challenged by digital currencies. And because people will then use it. The problem with Bitcoin and others is it fluctuates in value. And if a currency fluctuates in value, it is useless as a real currency. Imagine if you'd taken a mortgage 6 years ago in Bitcoin for $250,000. You know, about 10 million today or some such. So they're not there yet, but eventually it's going to happen, and there will be that real battle of who's going to have the monopoly. The other thing you have to avoid is digital currency should not be made by central banks. We don't want the government to know everything you do with your money on a day-to-day basis, whereas with the digital currencies, every transaction you do is going to be in the hands of bureaucracies. Don't buy the baloney, oh, it'll be safe. Yeah, right. Until the next hacker comes along from Beijing, and it's something to watch out for. It's a gross invasion of privacy. So let it develop, and God bless them. But I'm going to buy my hedges with gold. I'm old-fashioned.
Appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to the audience, and I don't know if we've got if people can project their voices, but if you could, just by a show of hands, please let me know if you have a question. Yes, gentlemen.
And you can wait for the microphone. One moment. Name and where you're from.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a senator from Connecticut. I have a question for Mr. Forbes. In Friedrich Hayek's book, The Denationalization of Money, he floated the idea that we can have a free market in money where individual private enterprises would issue the coins and that they'll be incentivized to keep the value of the currency stable because otherwise lenders and borrowers won't be able to use those currencies. Do you think that that's a viable system going to the future?
It's a variation of what they used to call free banking, which we had in this country really big before the Civil War, where thousands of banks issued their own dollars. And that's how you got the phrase, if you read in history books, what they called wildcat banks. Banks would open up, since they didn't have railroads for much of that period, in areas where it would be very hard to get to, issue the currency, on the theory that it would be too hard for you to go to the bank and take the currency and get the gold or silver in return. So wildcat banking. So historians poo-poo free banking, poo-poo currency competing with each other, but that's the promise of digital currencies, is that you can put a currency together that two parties may use on doing a transaction. The government will fight it. They'll say you can't use it for paying taxes. They'll try to say you can't use the courts to enforce a contract made in a digital currency. They'll fight hard. We know they'll fight hard. But that Hayek vision is what could happen. Again, keep the central bank out of it and let people in the marketplace determine if I want to take a digital currency, the Coolidge currency. Maybe I trust that more than what they're doing over at the Fed. So, but that can happen thanks to technology.
Show of hands. The gentleman in the back.
Hello. Hi, I'm Harash, and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had two questions. First, you mentioned about simplifying the tax code and how there's a lot of wasted productive effort in all these different loopholes and that kind of things. First question is, why hasn't this been simplified yet, and what can we practically do to make it more simplified? And secondly, the second question is, what, if any, is the use of AI in policy decisions, and can AI or algorithms be used in making decisions and decentralizing things in the future?
Well, in terms of AI, virtue of AI is that it gives you more access to quick information right now, even in its early stages. I'm old enough to remember a thing called card catalogs. Remember those in college, where you laboriously had to look up and go through? Now you do it in a matter of seconds. So in terms of decision making, it can be a real help. And your first question was, why don't they do it? The reason they don't do it is because complexity is a source of power. And being able to hand out credits and this thing and that thing via the tax code is simply irresistible. And so the only way you get change is the way Ronald Reagan said, the best way to persuade minds on Capitol Hill is through the white heat of public opinion. They ain't going to do it on their own, which makes the story we heard earlier about how we got the reduction of the capital gains tax so remarkable in 1978 against the wishes of President Carter, and a Republican doing it when the Republicans were outnumbered 2-1 on the Hill was remarkable. But those episodes are very, very rare. You're going to have to agitate for it, ask candidates about it. Why do you go with this thing? You don't understand what's in the code. Why are you keeping it, foisting it, and hurting us? And don't let them say, well, I'm giving you this credit or that credit. It's the old thing, I'll take $1 from you and give you 75 cents back in various goodies. So they use your money to buy your vote. So ask the questions, start asking the questions, and suddenly you'll start to get some attention. And they'll say two big things. They'll say it would destroy housing because you wouldn't have the mortgage deduction anymore. The fact of the matter is, if you earn more after tax, you have more money, you can buy more house. That's the key thing. The other thing they say is charitable giving. No one will give to charity if they can't deduct it. Well, experience shows that in this country, we give in charity cash about 2% of GDP each year. Sometimes it's a little below, sometimes a little above. In the 1980s, when the top rate was cut in the income tax code from 70% down to 28%, a lot of institutions opposed it, charitable institutions, because they thought it hurt giving. And what they found out instead was, since people had more money, they gave more. Charitable giving reached record levels as tax rates came down. So those are two biggies against the flat tax. And it does not cause loss of hair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forbes. I'm Ann Vroom, and a privilege to be an observer here. Quick question, one word, tariffs. What do you think about the President's Liberation Day situation?
I still have to get out of this town, so I better be careful. Tariff is another word for tax. It is a tax. And I think the Supreme Court is going to throw out the tariffs that were put in by executive order. There are other tariffs that come through stuff like Section 231 or whatever, where there are established procedures on how you apply the tariff. But a tariff, since it's a tax and it's not an emergency, he says it's an emergency, but then makes it plain they're going to last forever. And for instance, Nixon in 1971 imposed temporary tariffs, but they were just for a few months for that alleged emergency, and then they were withdrawn. But since these are in effect permanent and capricious in what they go on, like bananas one day, maybe bottled water the next, who knows. But I think the Supreme Court's going to rule you have to go through Congress to impose those tariffs, or have some other procedure like these various sections on what they call dumping to put in a tax. And even though the president will be enraged by it, it actually is going to do him a favor, the way the Supreme Court did Franklin Roosevelt a favor in his first term, when the Supreme Court threw out the National Recovery Administration, which was the most statist action intrusion in the American economy, where businesses could get together, industries could get together and put in rules on prices, wages. And Amity wrote about it in her book, The Forgotten Man, about chicken pluckers or sellers in Brooklyn were thrown in jail because they didn't sell the chickens the right way. And the Supreme Court said, no, it's unconstitutional. They ruled unanimously. So Roosevelt railed about it, he tried to pack the court, but that was thrown out, and that's what saved the early New Deal, by throwing it out Now, they tried other crazy things, but if that had remained in, the U.S. economy would have been in such dreadful shape, the Democrats could not have, even against the pitiful Republicans at the time, would have paid a real political price at the polls. So I think the Supreme Court will do it again. Roosevelt didn't say thank you. I don't expect President Trump to say thank you if they rule that the tariffs are a tax, and there's a prescribed way of how you enact taxes in this country.
Hi, Mr. Forbes. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'm Akilan. I'm a freshman in college. My question is pretty simple. We had a discussion, the third discussion of today with Mr. DeMuth, who was telling us about sort of Silicon Valley and how there's been a huge and sort of growth in the development there of various different kinds of enterprise. And we can argue about whether this enterprise was, let's say, moral or immoral or good or bad. But my question for you is should we as citizens be the ones who are responsible for deciding is private enterprise going to be something that's beneficial and how we go about it, or is it the government's role to set the incentives for what kind of morality frameworks we should use in the development of this enterprise, and then develop those companies from there? So what should come first?
Government morality is not just an oxymoron, but translated in English means got to win the next election. And how do I win the next election? That's morality. And I don't want the government deciding what's moral. There are plenty of other people willing to do that for us, but we don't need the government with the ability of a monopoly of force to decide what's moral and immoral. We tried it with liquor, with prohibition. And by the way, on liquor, after the American Revolution or even before, until the 1820s, 1830s, we were a nation of alcoholics. A massive amount of drinking on a level we haven't seen since. Part of it was you didn't trust the water. John Adams would begin the day with a grog of beer because you didn't trust the water. So, you can make comedies about people being plastered, it became a real social problem. And so there rose up ministers and others saying if you have a self-governing nation, you need self-governing individuals. And so that's how the temperance movement was the first public health movement in the U.S., and it worked. Now, politics got involved. Certain states like Maine tried to abolish booze, and then came the 18th Amendment, then repealed in the 21st Amendment. But it was voluntary, people saying this is not a good thing. So in terms of morality, leave it to education, not government. And so in terms of inventions, again, inventions can be used for good things or bad things. If it's a bad thing, government can outlaw it. If it's a lethal weapon, they can outlaw it or put restrictions on it. But again, let people decide what they think is good. And you just look at the history of liquor, by the way, which spawns most crazy laws in the country. Each state is a morass. But anyway, on the liquor side, younger people, for a while, booze sales went down. Wine industry's reeling. The bourbon industry's reeling, both from less demand and from tariffs. And but now I read that maybe kids are starting to drink again. I don't know. I don't want to know. And you see it in smoking. Vaping became a big thing. They said, oh, that'll lead to smoking. Actually, until very recently, smoking among teenagers reached record lows in this country. So let markets decide, and if you want to put restrictions like marijuana, the kind they have today is 5 times more lethal than when I was growing up. I never used it. I didn't inhale, just for the record. But it can do immense damage. Well, there should be a discussion of that. So if something is damaging, maybe there should be restrictions on sales. By the way, the government has killed, even though it's legal in many areas, has killed the marijuana, what I still call marijuana industry, with the taxes and regulations. So it's still off the books in a lot of areas. And by the way, one final thing on taxes. Nobody's in favor of cigarettes. And so some states like New York have huge taxes on cigarettes. I think about 60-70% of the cigarettes now sold in New York, especially New York City, are bootleg from states like North Carolina, reservations, not legal sales. So high taxes bring their own problems, whole rubric of unintended consequences. So Coolidge was right, oftentimes less is more.
I'm Trevor Darr. I'm a sophomore at Duke University, and so my question is pretty straightforward. When our greatest economic adversary in the world engages in predatory currency manipulation, wouldn't it be casting down our sword and shield to go back onto the gold standard?
No, it'd be the best way to counter the fake currencies that think they can manipulate their way to prosperity. Britain kept the whole history of Britain rising up from this third-rate power to a global capital center of the world. Just ask how Britain, with a population 1/4 or 1/5 of France, beat France in North America because they had developed a way to do government debt. They developed capital markets far more sophisticated than what the French had. And even though they lost the colonies, they still were the capital center of the world. And so if China wants to manipulate its currency, you can take some products and be laser-like about it in terms of saying that's dumping, that's this, that's that. But the idea, if they're going to cheat on weights and measures, therefore we should cheat on weights and measures, no. We want to be the place to go where the Chinese will do what the people in Latin America have often done, and that is use dollars instead of their local currency. 2 countries, and 3 actually, Panama, Ecuador, and El Salvador, formally have the dollar as their currency. Argentina should do it. They haven't done it yet. I hope they get around to it. But that's one of the things we should do in Venezuela, since certain guys now in charge, is dollarize the economy. No one trusts the Bolivar. And you dollarize Venezuela and put in a lower tax rate system, you'll see Venezuela prosper, not from the oil fields, but from entrepreneurship. Oil will become less and less important as entrepreneurship is allowed to flourish. But you have to have something trustworthy. So let them play games. No country has ever devalued its way to prosperity. And all you have to do is look at our friends in Argentina, Zimbabwe, and elsewhere. It always leads to tears. Does not work.
Steve Forbes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.